Hello and welcome to the show where I try and make a little sense out of this stunning and brave new world we all live in by talking to a series of expert witnesses and inviting them to share their truth. It's important in life to be in touch with your feelings, but it's also crucial to be able to back those feelings up with facts. And so the purpose of this show is to attempt to push past purely personal or political driven positions, distinguish fact from fiction and fake news headlines, and hopefully contribute to wider debates about sometimes sensitive subjects by having a good old-fashioned, open and honest adult chat. And today I'm talking sense not sensibility with activist and an anti-feminist gender equality champion, Elizabeth Hobson. Elizabeth is the Director of Communications for the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. And alongside Natty, who I also recently talked to, is a member of the Ladies for Philip Davies Coalition, a regular contributor to Honey Badger Radio, and one of the coordinators of the Messages for Men conference held annually in London to mark International Men's Day. I sat down for a chat with Elizabeth a few weeks before she and J4MB party leader Mike Buchanan gave a talk at Cambridge University on male inequalities and the history of feminism. And if you're a regular viewer of the Glass Blind Spots, you'll know that they were treated disgracefully by some of the students who attempted to disrupt the event after they failed in their efforts to close down the talk.
Universities should be arenas wherein students build resilience, tolerance and dignity, but increasingly activists are subverting these spaces to feed anxiety, black and white thinking and hysteria within their communities. And this is harmful to the search for truth that they should be engaged in, and also harmful to the individuals they claim to want to protect, including themselves. Feels like a competition.
She's a pocket rocket with nerves of steel, a powerful speaker, and a highly regarded ambassador for the men's rights movement. She also does an impressive impersonation of the recently anointed leader of the Liberal Democrats, so stick around at the end if you want to hear more about that. But first, one of the things I was particularly keen to talk to her about was pressure group Hope Not Hate's recent State of Hate report, which featured in the most recent episode of the Problems with Men series. A report which had some unflattering things to say about her party, and also proposed that men's rights offers a gateway to right-wing extremism. We get into that and a whole lot more, including the key values espoused by men's rights activism, common criticisms about their movement, and some highly controversial views about Game of Thrones and The Incredibles Part 2. But to begin with, I asked Elizabeth about her own personal experience of how her work is perceived and portrayed by others.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of two stories, I think, with that. And one is in my personal life, and with the people who I know in real life. And the other is the public kind of persona that I have and what is out there about me in public. So, the good news is that whilst I've been pretty reticent in, past kind of years to out myself as dissenting from feminism and, being committed to a fight for equality for men and boys in particular, to the mums from school, for example, who obviously it's really important that they like me, not just, not for me, I don't really care who likes me and who doesn't, I'd rather be honestly who I am, but, because of the children, I don't want the children being ostracized because the parents think that, their mum is some insane or malevolent person. So it took me years to come out as who I really am. With the mums at school. And when I did, I started gently at a drink. We went for a drink at a pub, like a group of maybe 8 of us.
Okay.
And I actually planned what I was going to say. I started by just teasing out some kind of like feminist ideas, which were like solely focused on women.
Yeah.
So I remember one of the first conversations we had was about the Danish hijab ban.
Okay. Yeah.
And that turned into a really interesting conversation, actually. And after that, I kind of became like expected to come up with, like, when the conversation was lagging, like, you've got a good conversation starter, haven't you, Elizabeth? You know, so like bring it on, like, what can we kind of chew over today? And bit by bit, you know, my opposition to feminism and the issues that I think are really important, which are generally pertaining to men and boys, were coming out, you know, to the point where, I mean, you know, when I started working for J4MB, like, you know, these are women I know, and suddenly I was spending like all of my time engaged in this kind of advocacy and activism, and it's like I couldn't not mention it.
Yeah.
Couldn't not mention it.
Yeah, that sounds okay.
It's double negative. You know what? Like, I mean, it's been really, really resoundingly positive. Actually, it's not even been just okay. Like, I had a conversation with 2 of my mum friends about Me Too, and one of them went home and had a conversation with her partner, and she came back to me and she said, like, you know, we had the best conversation and we actually feel closer, you know, because he actually felt like his perspective was being taken into account and that he was listened to, you know, because I'd kind of just cracked her Overton window in her mind, you know, to the idea that maybe, you know, there is another side to the Me Too movement. And, you know, another mum friend, when I told her who I was working with, said, you know, or I mentioned that our primary campaigning issue is around male genital mutilation, and she kind of quickly jumped in and said, oh, well, I think the worst thing is like fathers being denied access to their kids. And I was like,
yeah,
really?
Brilliant. Yeah,
absolutely, you know. And so, yeah, it's been really, really positive. And I mean, I wonder whether, you know, I imagine my experience is slightly different because, you know, I'm talking to mums, and women after they have children, you know, notoriously become more conservative, and, you know, they generally have, you know, partners, and they might have sons. So, you know, obviously if I was like a student in a university who was trying to come out to their friends, I might have a different experience of that. But for me, it's been really good. Really good.
Excellent.
But,
but
you know, that's a little bit different. So, I mean, you know, routinely from feminists, both men and women, I get kind of all manner of, you know, I've got internalized misogyny and I'm a pick-me. You know, I mean, that kind of makes me laugh because I don't know any women, in the men's rights movement who aren't like married or in a long-term relationship. It's like, you know, the idea that we're all desperate for male attention. It's like, you know,
I'd never heard that term. Nadia explained it to me, and
for some reason it's gaining currency recently, and
I can see, you know, it's another way of attacking. You know, that it's a very unfeminist way of attacking a woman as well.
Isn't it,
you know?
just?
But yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's, kind of been to, a men's rights conference, I wouldn't necessarily say, it's a congregation of male models, or, it's, so there are certainly better places, to go if that's, what your motivation is. Kind of, because that's generally my experience as well, both in terms of, kind of with personal friends, but also kind of when this subject comes up in a professional capacity. And it's kind of interesting because, I mean, you were saying, when you were young, the default position is almost always feminism, because it's kind of like, well, yeah, okay, well, that feminism means equality between the sexes. That's fine, I'm a feminist. But then when you start talking about these issues, it sort of very quickly kind of flips into, well, yeah, people on the men's rights spectrum believe in that also, but they're not feminists. And the feminists are using all sorts of very bizarre and nefarious and devious and downright unethical tactics to shut them up and shut those conversations. So people, I think, do sort of generally, that is why people have always, the closer they get to feminism in reality, the further away they find themselves moving. Is that fair?
I think, there are a few responses, I'd say, to kind of getting closer to feminism, and so one is what, a lot of feminists do when they've, sunk and invested so much energy and emotion into the identity of being a feminist, which is to just double down and, shut out the, our voices, the critical voices. I know Neil Linden has told me that, he does still have one or two friends from his days, as a kind of pro-feminist, yeah. And he sent them No More Sex War, and they just said, look, I can't read this because I don't want to know if everything I believe,
Yes.
they were honest about it. They, and kudos to them for that, I suppose, because a lot of them will just, say, these people are all monsters, yeah. But the truth is, I think that they can't bear the process of, having, the death of that part of themselves and having to rebuild.
If you've gone down a road for so far, there's partly an ego thing, and then there's also partly oh my God, what have I done thing. And that's interesting, because some of the behaviors,
some people is as well, because some people make a lot of money out of feminism. Yes.
Well, I would almost compare it to, I don't know if you have a faith or not, but somebody who maybe joins the church for a career, and then after 30 years decides kind of that they have a different perception of the world, but it's a good job. So kind of, and that's interesting, because I think that's where you get into the area of sort of cognitive dissonance, where sometimes people, they actually put up those kind of psychological barriers, so they're not even maybe consciously. That's interesting, what you were saying about Neil Linden's friend saying, I don't want to, to read your book, because that is very honest. I had a good sort of friend, colleague, and I offered her a copy of The Red Pill, and the look of horror on her face.
Wow.
And actually, horror is not the right word. She looked scared. You know, that sort of, and that might be because of her perception of what is in that film. But yeah. Okay. Well, listen. I mean, one of the things that
that was only one response.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Go on.
The other response is the kind of what the likes of Julia Hartley-Brewer, Christina Hoff Sommers, and Camille Paglia do, which is they will criticize modern feminism vehemently, but they have some kind of positive feeling that they attach to the label, and so they want to reform it.
Yeah.
Which I felt at one point, but then I learned more and more about feminism, and now I kind of look at them and it's like, but what do you mean reform? Like reform and go back to when? It's always been myopic and misandric, and the gains that have been made for women and women's liberation have mainly been, as a result of kind of technological advancements, and of course there's been philosophy as well, but, the good ideas in feminism, like equality, are not unique to feminism.
No.
So I don't really get why they seek to reform it, but they do some excellent work in criticizing what goes on, so thank you to them for that. But then the other response is what happened to me, which is that the more I have learned and the more that I do learn, the more in opposition I feel, the more outraged and angry and I am, and more I want to fight against it, and in its entirety, really. And I think that process can take different lengths of time and different kind of exposure levels for a lot of people, and because we are so submerged in this kind of feminist culture and these feminist ideas, it can take a long time, and it's like the friends that I was talking about, it's like I felt like I was really connecting with them over the kind of whole feminism thing, and I was, and they were really, thinking new thoughts, and it was really lovely, and they were really open to hearing what I had to say and considering it, and then they'll turn around and say something like, yeah, but, we do need feminism because of the gender pay gap or something like that,
Yeah.
And even people who are self-declared opponents of feminism and MRAs will come out with things like, but feminism is needed in the developing world because girls don't have access to education. And, that has not been a gendered problem for a long time. The unschooled population is 50-50 girls and boys.
Yeah.
There are pockets where there are more girls than boys who are not schooled, but there are also pockets where there are more boys than girls not schooled. It's
a paradox. I'm going to mention sort of one thing about kind of a valid criticism of MRAs, which I think is something to an extent I think is fair, and so therefore we have to be conscious of, because it's the it's the exact opposite, the exact sort of mirror image of feminism in some respects. There's this paradox that, well, I suppose I like to think of it as a kind of feminism as a brand is very tainted So it's tainted as a brand. But the problem is it's also the kind of market leader, so it is the Gillettes of the of the gender equality markets. So people kind of necessarily have to set up in opposition to it, as opposed to just simply take the good bits of feminism and move it into the area of, the brand of egalitarianism, for example, doesn't have those connotations. And so the valid criticism is that there is a danger that MRAs then become a mirror image of feminists. So they're they're both on the sidelines, and one is fighting purely on men's issues, and one is purely fighting on women's issues. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I like your kind of analysis of feminism as being toxic yet the brand leader, because people don't necessarily have positive kind of ideas about feminism. You see that in all kinds of polls that come out, and they'll say 30% of people think that, have negative opinions of it, but it's so ubiquitous that, most of those people will also have a lot of feminist ideas, because, they're pushed by everyone and every authority. And, okay, onto the main question. I think I don't really see it in the men's rights movement. If you're, being quite specific, like people who label themselves as MRAs, like say there are a lot of women involved, and I think that most of us, I did write an article for AVFM recently because I got sick of the accusation that the men's human rights movement is a tradcon Trojan horse.
Okay.
And I defined the values that I think most people in the men's human rights movement hold, sacred, as being liberty, justice, equality, individualism, and meritocracy. And, I mean, it was only recently that we got embroiled. Sort of, I was slightly involved, but a lot of the other kind of honey badgers were involved in an altercation with some pickup artists, and some people, I'm not sure how they identify. Some of them were PUAs. One of them was what's his name, Rollo Tomasi.
That was on Twitter recently, wasn't it?
It was on Twitter, yeah. I saw that. I'm not sure how he identifies, but they were running an event called something like the Patriarchs something or other. They were criticizing us for having these ideas about equality, and I think that in the perception of the kind of wider world and in the image of the men's rights movement that feminists try to push in particular, a lot of people who aren't MRAs are conflated into our movement. And so people like them, obviously we get people like Elliot Rodger blamed us, and he had absolutely no interest in our movement. So I kind of deny categorically the idea that really anyone that I can think of in the MRA or in the MRM, is anything like a kind of the other side of the coin to feminism. I think, there are people who exist who are the other kind of side of the coin to feminism, like very extreme kind of sectarian MGTOWs, and that doesn't represent their whole movement as either. I think in general the MGTOW movement is a positive movement, but there are some generally quite noisy outliers who are quite unpleasant.
Yeah. No, I no, I like perhaps I'm kind of being a bit too unfair, or maybe not even describing myself correctly. I suppose kind of, to me, it's kind of a paradox, because you have, on the one hand, it's impossible not to interact with feminism because it is such a market leader. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it's very hard not to, at times, engage in their approach.
Now, yes, I agree with you here.
So, I'll give you an example. Yeah. The misogyny, hate crime debate.
Oh, yeah.
To the obvious extension. Well, there are two perspectives on that. First of all, no, we should not.
Bad idea. Yeah.
Yeah, bad idea. But then the fallback position as well. If you're going to do it, then we need misandry. Exactly. And I think both of those positions are valid. I think you can hold both of those positions at the same time. So I suppose I'm just more teasing out kind of one of the, because it's a criticism that is certainly labelled, and certainly to a large extent unfairly, criticism that men's rights, they're misogynists. They only kind of they're I suppose ironically they're viewed as male supremacists, which is kind of ironic because feminism much more fits that kind of supremacy model, I would argue. But that men's rights have no... As soon as you start a conversation, it's the whataboutery aspect, I suppose, I'm trying to tease out.
I mean, in terms of supremacy, feminism campaigns for women to be treated more preferentially as compared to men.
Yeah.
No one in the men's rights movement does that. People in the men's rights movement campaign for men to be treated in the same way as, women, for both sexes to have the same opportunities and choices and rights. But, I do think that there is, I call it being too far down the rabbit hole, which is, a kind of tendency towards like snowflakism, and a lack of humor that sometimes can affect people in our movement. And I think I've been guilty of it every so often, when you kind of see something and your knee-jerk response is like, how can they portray men in such a negative light, or boys, when actually, it's just something that's kind of funny. Or I remember seeing there was this video that was being shown to people in university, and it's called Tea and Consent.
Oh, yes.
And I was like, this just like, suggests that all men are kind of rapists who, need to see this kind of thing. And like, actually, if you watch it, it doesn't mention gender at all. I don't know what the kind of intentions of the makers were, but actually in the content of the video itself, it is even-handed.
Yeah. I think that's a good expression, falling down the rabbit hole. That because you get... My wife keeps reminding me, she's very supportive of the work I do, but she keeps reminding me that none of this is real. And what she really means by that is most people don't think about these things. So there can be a danger. I don't know if you follow Game of Thrones at all. Is that
No, I'm really shockingly bad at TV. I haven't seen anything that everybody else has seen. I keep saying, like, when I retire, I'm going to watch so many box sets.
Yeah, well, I'll explain this in a way that hopefully doesn't spoil your viewing in years to come. But there was a big episode this week, and there was quite a backlash from some quarters. And in my Twitter feed, I was seeing a lot of people that I follow kind of like were very annoyed because essentially, kind of a female character who's played by kind of quite an annoying teenager who's fourth wave feminist in her in her perspective, kind of got to be the hero. Mm-hmm. And the thing was that sort of it did actually fit entirely with the logic of the narrative, and it's been a balanced, kind of. But because there are so many examples, like the Captain Marvel and Doctor Who, people are now very defensive about that sort of thing. So that's I suppose what I'm teasing at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I did watch recently was The Incredibles 2.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen that, but I mean, basically, the superheroes have been in hiding, and then they come back to face this new foe. Or it's Mrs. Incredible, Elastigirl, who's kind of tasked with the job of defeating this foe, and Mr. Incredible stays at home with the baby.
Okay.
And, it's really fantastic. It's an excellent film, and I posted something about it on Facebook and got into quite, a few heated kind of sub-threads with people saying like that they were, Mr. Incredible was this like, kind of oafish, like rubbish dad, and like Elastigirl was just amazing, and it was really tediously, feminist. And I don't think that's true. I think they were too far down the rabbit hole, and it's like Mr. Incredible, he doesn't have an easy time, but every parent that I know can relate to kind of bags under the eyes, like reaching for the cookies to placate the baby. And, he had like this bloody combustible, dimensional changeling of a baby, so the idea that he would just, be really effortlessly brilliant at the job is like, it's not real life, and it wouldn't have been entertaining, and it wouldn't have been engaging.
That's it. I think kind of. I mean, that's really.
You do get where it comes from, because there is that, there is a tendency in kind of media to portray these perfect women who are excellent at everything, and they don't have to work to achieve what they achieve, and men being portrayed as dumb or violent, or just there to be kind of killed in action films. But I think you could be too sensitive about it.
That's it. There's a lot of it about, but sometimes then you sort of, if you're kind of looking for it, you start to see it more, and that can. And I think I suppose my point is you can extend that across the whole subject matter, because I've found, as I've kind of become more educated about this, occasionally I have to just stop myself and kind of pull back a little bit, because you can get a bit too passionate and zealoty about any subject. So I suppose that's really what I mean. I want to give you a quote, okay, and it's from the Hope Not Hates report, their state of hate.
This will be kind then, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of okay. Well, so let me get this right. So we'll talk about it in a minute, but we'll lead it in with this quote, because I think it sort of relates to what you were saying about like to pick up artists and kind of MGTOW, and a lot of people are kind of associated or conflated as men's rights activists where they're really not. And obviously, Hope Not Hate very much kind of do that, and but they do actually identify MRA specifically. So I'm just curious to see what you think of this. The subcultures of the manosphere, by and large, undermine their own political growth, be it because they're focused primarily on individual lifestyles. Okay. The exception to this are men's rights activists, in part because they employ a framework, brackets, however misguidedly, of human rights activism. So what are your thoughts on just on that paragraph?
Well, I mean, actually, I've pulled up this article I wrote on the TradCon Trojan horse idea, because I did respond to that direct quote in it.
Okay.
And we are a human rights movement. We're not misusing the framework.
Yeah.
And I think the difference between MRAs or the MRM and the kind of progressive movement that Hope Not Hate is a part of is like, I think I denied that we're kind of tradcons, although I didn't deny that we have some kind of conservative ideas, because I think that we have gratitude to the civilization that's been built on the kind of, by generations past, and working within the kind of conservative traditional setup. Yeah. But we're also progressives, because we want to expand on the kind of values that our societies have been built on, the kind of liberty and meritocracy and freedom and equality. But, Hope Not Hate, they call themselves progressives, but, I would call them ideologues. And, they have these revolutionary ideas, and what they want to do, we want to preserve what's good about our civilization and build upon it. They want to burn it to the ground and start from scratch. And I don't think that progressive is the right word to describe that.
Yeah. Yeah,
I take their accusation that we are fake human rights campaigners, and I throw back in their face that they're fake progressives, basically.
Yeah. Well, I thought that was the interesting thing when I actually kind of sat down and read the Hope Not Hate reports, is that, and I talked to Natty about this as well, and kind of, it was surprising, kind of most of it was like, yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, men's rights activists employ a framework of human rights activism. Well, yeah.
I thought it was quite well researched as well.
Yes, yeah. So it really, if I was looking at this as a kind of lay person and, wasn't really aware of the background, both to Hope Not Hate and to men's rights activism, the main criticism essentially is that you're not feminists. You're not doing it the way that they want you to do it. So therefore, you're somehow far right and lumped in with, and I'm sure there are kind of criticisms about other aspects of the reports, but essentially that they're kind of basically saying, well, you're literally you're one step away from being a Nazi if you're championing men's rights. So I wanted to ask you, kind of, just in terms of your own personal feelings about that report and any other coverage. I remember, I think there was coverage in The Guardian a few years ago to do with the ladies for Philip Davis. Mm. And, I think the thing is they're pretty nasty smears. I would view them. And that's, the whole point of it is, I guess, that, people are both less likely to associate or become, or look into men's rights activism, but also to want to, kind of associate with people that are men's rights activists. So
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to, to ask about your
Yeah,
personal
I
feelings about
mean,
it.
I would say, like, are they? Because from where I'm kind of sitting, it's all of the smears and accusations and kind of name calling is like water off a duck's back for me at this point.
Yeah.
But I also think that were it not, for kind of Paul Elam's like clickbaity titles for his articles, like, make October Smash a Violent Bitch Month and stuff like that, Cassie J wouldn't have looked into the men's rights movement. It was the kind of the apparent kind of outrageousness, and terribleness that kind of attracted her attention and made her like look into it. And so, I feel like at this point in time, whenever I get a mention anywhere, it's a victory, whether it's in a Hope Not Hate report or, that's unfavourable, or, there is a Guardian article, I'll give you a scoop here, there's a Guardian article coming out tomorrow that's going to mention us in light of the allegations that we've engaged in harassment that were put forward in the open letter to Stephen Toop at Cambridge.
Okay.
I don't expect that to be favourable, and most people will kind of, skim it and not be very interested or think, oh, that's bad. But, there might be a couple of people who go, God, that's terrible. I want to find out some more about this, because people are kind of morbid, aren't they? And they have a big fascination with kind of terrible people. And so they'll look into it. And, maybe if, a couple of people do that, one of them will look into us and go, actually, they seem kind of not that bad, and maybe we'll even change their mind or open their mind just a little bit on, or, bring an issue to their attention that they'd never thought about. So, I fully encourage and enjoy all of the smears, really.
Okay, no, that's interesting.
I hope that they're of use. I think they might be.
Well, yeah, I guess there's nothing worse than not being talked about, and that's there is that thing. I think you very much see it with International Men's Day, and I know it's a quote that Mike uses quite a lot. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you. Then they fight you, and I think we're at the kind of, I'm not sure if fighting is necessarily the most helpful word, but it was very noticeable last year that feminists were embracing International Men's Day very much, and essentially trying to co-opt it and coerce it into let's talk about toxic masculinity because we're very concerned about men. So. Yeah, no, because one of the things I'm particularly curious to talk to Mike about is, some of the approaches that J4MB have used, and the likes. I'm thinking particularly of the, what is it, the lying feminist of the month kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think in a way you've kind of answered that. I'm thinking of the Sargon of Akkad controversy at the minute about the kind of I wouldn't rape you, and it's quite similar in the sense that sort of, on the one hand, it kind of, I personally didn't like that he did that for various reasons, but he did it, so that's what he did. But kind of the logic would be that it actually is then a very easy smear to push into people's minds. And you're right, some people will then look in more detail and learn the context and the whole, kind of what that was actually about. But it's a bit of a high wire tactic, I suppose, is maybe is maybe the thought. But yeah, no, I kind of...
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on audience as well, though, doesn't it? You know, I mean, I get on really, really well with my mother-in-law, you know, and we generally vote in similar ways. And we generally have kind of, you know, similar thoughts about what's going on in politics, you know, and she's certainly no friend to feminism as well. But, you know, we have a point of difference here where, you know, I love Carl Benjamin and she's like, oh, I don't like him at all, you know, and all she's getting is the mainstream media, you know, she's in her 60s and whatever. But, you know, would she ever have voted for him? You know, I tend to doubt it. Whereas the kind of young internet savvy people who do know his work, you know, and may vote for him, will kind of, they see what he was doing with it. You know, I don't think he's going to lose votes over that, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I guess this is a good point to finish on for now, but happily Elizabeth has got plenty more to say in part 2 of this interview. In the meantime, why not say hello and check out her YouTube channel by following the links below. And while you're at it, why not like, subscribe and share this episode, because it really, really helps to help keep this show on the road. Long-time subscribers of The Glass Blind Spot may know that Elizabeth and I have collaborated on a few previous projects, and we thought that we should take the opportunity to acknowledge Jo Swinson's recent anointment as the new leader of the Liberal Democrats by reminding her of the invitation Elizabeth graciously extended to her a while back at the end of an episode of The Glass Blind Spot entitled Jo Swinson's Abuse of Trust and Power. In the same episode, Elizabeth also very kindly narrated a section of Jo Swinson's orange-tinted manifesto, Equal Power, where she rather unkindly and childishly attempted to portray me as the edgy pantomime villain of her less than convincing chapter addressing male inequalities. For the uninitiated, I'll leave a link below, and any Liberal Democrats watching, please do pass along the still open invitation. I certainly know who I'd prefer to vote for.
Jo, I hope that you feel my recitation of your work does it justice. That extract from chapter 9 of your book Equal Power is all that I've read so far, and I found it, frankly, dishonourable. I think that you should not underestimate how angry some men and some women, such as myself, feel at your feminist misrepresentations of individuals and the truth, at your authoritarian feminist scorn of choice and freedom, at your perpetuation of the feminist sex war, which can only do harm. We are the gender equality champions, and you feminists are standing in the way of just progress. I would like to show you the bigger picture. If you'd like to talk, let me know. I don't think you're a bad person. I just think you need to open your eyes, and I'm willing to help if you're willing to listen.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.
The Glass Blind Spot is brought to you by you, because it's your views, your likes and your comments that keep this show on the road.